14:33 p.m. Eastern Mediterranean, 180 nautical miles west of the Lebanese coast. An Iranian drone just hit USS Thomas Hudner, a Shahed 131, the smaller, faster variant of Iran's primary kamikaze drone, impacted the destroyer's helicopter hangar door at 14:33 p.m., detonating a 15-kilogram fragmentation warhead that perforated the hangar door, destroyed a moored MH-60 Seahawk helicopter inside, and started a Class Bravo fire in the aviation fuel servicing station directly aft. 21 seconds later, the second drone hit, same bearing, slightly lower. The impact point was 6 feet below the first, deliberately offset, as if the formation had been designed so that the first impact would draw damage control teams to one position while the second struck adjacent to it, which is exactly what it was designed to do. By the time the fire suppression system activated in the hangar bay, 3 damage control team members were already there, and the second detonation hit the access door they were standing beside. All 3 survived. One required immediate surgery. Welcome to Navy Combat USA. This is the afternoon a U.S. Navy destroyer in the Eastern Mediterranean was struck by 2 Iranian kamikaze drones, and the fleet-wide defensive response that activated across 6 American warships in the same carrier strike group within 71 seconds of the first impact. Or, to understand how Iranian kamikaze drones reached a U.S. Navy warship in the Eastern Mediterranean, you need to understand the operational context that had been building for 3 weeks before the strike. The USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group had been operating in the Eastern Mediterranean as part of a heightened presence deployment following a period of regional escalation. The strike group consisted of the carrier Ford, 2 Ticonderoga-class cruisers, and 4 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, including USS Thomas Hudner. The strike group's primary mission was deterrence, visible, powerful, continuous deterrence, against further escalation by Iranian-backed proxy forces operating in Lebanon, Syria, and Gaza. The deterrence mission requires presence. Presence creates targeting opportunity. Iranian-backed forces had been collecting intelligence on the Ford Strike Group's operating patterns for the full 3 weeks of the deployment. Commercial vessels, fishing boats, and at least 2 merchant ships with modified communications equipment, assessed with moderate confidence by NSA signals intelligence as Iranian-connected collection platforms, had been operating at the edges of the strike group's exclusion zone on a near-daily basis. The strike group's anti-drone surveillance protocols had been elevated to continuous watch status on day 9 of the deployment, following an intelligence report indicating that Hezbollah had received a transfer of Shahed series drones from Iran through Syria in the preceding 30 days. The report assessed the transfer as approximately 40 to 60 airframes. The assessment was based on partial imagery and signals intelligence. It was an undercount. The actual transfer, assessed post-incident by a joint DIA-NSA analytical team, was approximately 120 airframes. Shahed 131 and Shahed 136 variants mixed in a ratio of approximately 60 to 40. The Shahed 131 is smaller, faster, and carries a lighter warhead. The Shahed 136 is slower, larger, and carries the 40-kilogram anti-armor warhead that previous incidents had demonstrated could cause serious damage to a naval vessel. The assessment error, 40 to 60 versus 120, created a planning gap. If the threat was 40 to 60 drones, a coordinated salvo of 8 to 12 was a reasonable upper planning scenario. If the threat was 120 drones, a coordinated salvo could be 20 to 30 airframes. The strike group had planned for 8 to 12. At 14:31 p.m. on the afternoon of the incident, 22 drones launched from 3 separate locations in Lebanon simultaneously. 1 position in the Bekaa Valley, 1 position on the coastal plain north of Beirut, and 1 position in the hills southeast of Tyre, on converging attack vectors targeting the eastern edge of the Ford Strike Group's operating area. 22 drones, 3 launch points, 1 coordinated time on target. The first detection came from USS Thomas Hudner's AN/SPY-6 radar at 14:31 p.m. and 44 seconds, approximately 90 seconds after the drones launched. The radar detected multiple small, slow contacts at low altitude, range approximately 87 nautical miles to the east. The initial system assessment: multiple small UAV contacts, classification uncertain, threat level pending. The watch officer, Lieutenant Aaron Nakamura, looked at the display. 22 contacts, multiple bearing tracks, all converging on the strike group's position. Not random, not divergent, converging. She triggered General Quarters at 14:32 p.m. and 8 seconds. The Combat Information Center acknowledged the GQ signal and began assigning intercept solutions. At 14:32 p.m. and 31 seconds, the tactical net came alive with a simultaneous report from two of the other destroyers in the group, USS Cole and USS Bulkley, both of which had also detected the formation on their own radar systems. 3 ships had eyes on the threat simultaneously. The carrier Ford, 23 nautical miles to the west of the Hudner, received the contact report at 14:32 p.m. and 39 seconds and immediately placed its own defensive systems on ready status. Strike Group Commander Rear Admiral Patricia Chen was in the Ford's flag bridge when the GQ alarm sounded. She had been reviewing logistics reports. She pushed them aside and moved to the tactical display in 7 seconds. What she saw was unambiguous. 22 contacts, all inbound. Time to closest point of approach for the lead contacts, approximately 94 seconds. 94 seconds! She had 6 warships in the water. She had SM-2 and SM-6 surface-to-air missiles. She had Phalanx CIWS systems on every hull. She had electronic warfare. She had CRAM point defense. She also had a geometry problem. The 22 contacts were not distributed evenly. 14 of them were tracked on a bearing that placed their approach vector directly toward the eastern sector of the strike group, the sector where USS Thomas Hudner was operating. 8 contacts were on a wider bearing, approaching from slightly north of east, targeting the strike group's center. The eastern sector, the Hudner's position, was going to absorb the first and largest portion of the salvo. The Hudner's vertical launch system had 96 cells. At 14:32 p.m., 34 of those cells contained SM-2 missiles. The remaining cells held SM-6, Tomahawk cruise missiles, and anti-submarine weapons. 34 SM-2 intercepts against 14 inbound contacts. That's 2.4 missiles per target, which in normal engagement doctrine gives approximately a 96% probability of kill against non-maneuvering, non-jamming targets. The Shahed 131 is a non-maneuvering, non-jamming target. The math said the Hudner should be able to handle its sector, but math doesn't account for the minimum engagement range. At the speed the contacts were traveling, approximately 185 knots, and the detection range of 87 nautical miles, the SM-2 engagement window opened at approximately 20 nautical miles. 14 contacts at 20 nautical miles, all requiring intercept solutions simultaneously. The engagement sequence takes time. You cannot fire 34 missiles simultaneously from a single launcher. The vertical launch system fires as fast as mechanically possible, approximately 1 missile per second per cell under optimal conditions. 14 intercept solutions, sequential engagement. Lead contacts closing at 185 knots. The first missiles would engage the lead contacts at approximately 18 nautical miles. The trailing contacts, if the first engagements took time, could close to within 5 nautical miles, inside the SM-2's effective minimum range, against low-altitude targets, before the Hudner's engagement sequence could get to them. The trailing contacts would have to be handled by CRAM or Phalanx. CRAM and Phalanx operate inside 9 kilometers and 1,500 meters respectively. Inside 1,500 meters means inside the hangar. All right. At 14:32 p.m. and 58 seconds, 50 seconds after the initial detection, the Hudner's VLS began firing. SM-2S went for the lead contacts. The engagements at 17 nautical miles were clean. The radar guided the missiles. The missiles found the targets. Contacts 1, 2, 3, and 4 in the Hudner's assigned intercept sequence were killed at 17.3, 16.8, 16.1, and 15.9 nautical miles respectively. 4 kills in 16 seconds. Contact 5 and 6 were engaged simultaneously at 14 nautical miles. Both killed. Contact 7 was engaged at 12 nautical miles. Killed. Contact 8 was engaged at 11 nautical miles. The SM-2 passed inside the lethal radius, but the fusing system did not initiate. A malfunction that investigators would later attribute to a lot-specific batch issue, with the proximity fuse in a group of SM-2 rounds that had been produced in the same manufacturing cycle. Contact 8 continued inbound. Contact 9 was already inside SM-2 minimum engagement range. Contact 10 was seconds behind it. Contacts 11 through 14 were in trail. The C-RAM launcher, 7-round rotary launcher, each round a RIM 116 missile, activated at 14:33 p.m. and 21 seconds. It engaged Contact 8 at 6.2 kilometers. Contact 8 was destroyed. Contact 9 was engaged at 4.1 kilometers. Contact 9 was destroyed. Contact 10 was engaged at 2.8 kilometers. The C-RAM's guidance system tracked the contact. The missile guided clean, and the fuse initiated. Contact 10 was destroyed. Contact 11 was at 1,800 meters when the Phalanx activated. At 1,800 meters and 185 knots, Contact 11 had approximately 19 seconds to impact. The Phalanx tracked, slewed, and fired at 1,400 meters. Contact 11 was destroyed at 900 meters. Contact 12 was at 700 meters when the Phalanx swung to acquire it. The system had ejected the spent barrel assembly from the previous engagement and was in a 2-second reload cycle. Contact 12 detonated at 220 meters, outside the Phalanx's suppression cone, already past the point where the weapon system could track and fire in the available window. The debris field from Contact 12's detonation swept the port side of the Hudner's superstructure. No significant damage, no casualties from the debris. But Contact 12 was not the one that hit. Contact 13 was. Contact 13 had been flying in trail behind Contacts 11 and 12 at a slightly different altitude, 6 meters above the water compared to the standard 8 to 10 meters of the other drones in the formation. The calibration had been set based on the known altitude profile of the Shahed 136 and the standard Shahed 131. The modified altitude of Contact 13 was 3 to 5 meters outside that calibration band. The Phalanx detected the contact. The system's fire control calculated an engagement solution. The solution was valid. The weapon would have hit, but the Phalanx had just destroyed Contact 12 and was in a reload sequence. By the time the system was ready to fire again, Contact 13 was inside the minimum engagement range. Contact 13 hit the hangar door at 14:33 p.m. Contact 14 hit 11 feet lower, 21 seconds later. Both carried 15-kilogram fragmentation warheads. Both detonated on contact. The damage assessment was completed over the following 4 hours, while the strike group maintained heightened alert status and emergency damage control teams worked inside the Hudner. The MH-60R Seahawk helicopter inside the hangar was destroyed. The aviation fuel servicing station was damaged by fire before automatic suppression activated. The hangar door required full replacement. Structural assessment of the hangar deck showed minor warping from the combined detonation heat and fragmentation. Within repair parameters, but requiring dry dock work. The Seahawk's loss was operationally significant. The Hudner had carried 2 helicopters. Now it had 1. Personnel casualties: 3 damage control team members injured by the secondary blast, 1 requiring surgery for fragmentation wounds to the left arm and shoulder. He was evacuated to a medical facility ashore within 4 hours. 14 sailors reported for medical evaluation with concussion symptoms following the detonation sequence. 9 were returned to duty within 24 hours. 5 were evacuated for further evaluation. The strike group's anti-drone engagement had destroyed 19 of 22 inbound contacts. 3 had reached the strike group's inner defensive envelope. 2 had hit. The engagement statistics were not in dispute, but the implications were Rear Admiral Chen's post-incident assessment, completed aboard the Ford while the Hudner was still conducting damage control, contained a passage that moved through the strike group's staff in the days following the incident and was later referenced in the classified briefing to NavCent. The engagement sequence performed as designed against the threat profile we planned for. It did not perform as designed against the threat profile we faced. The gap between those two profiles, specifically the undercount of available enemy airframes, the altitude modification of specific drones, and the sequential engagement limitation of a single ship's defensive system, represents a doctrinal vulnerability that was known in general terms and has now been demonstrated in specific terms against a U.S. Navy warship. Known in general terms, demonstrated in specific terms. That sentence was the most important thing written about the incident. The Phalanx altitude calibration issue, the 3 to 5 meter offset that had put Contact 13 inside the weapon's optimal engagement band, was identified and a recalibration issued to all Phalanx-equipped ships within 72 hours of the incident. The SM-2 fuze batch issue was identified, and a mandatory replacement order issued for all rounds from the same production lot. The intelligence undercount, 40 to 60 airframes assessed, 120 actually available, became the subject of a separate review within the DIA. The review examined why the collection gap had existed and what changes were needed to prevent similar undercounts of Iranian-supplied drone inventories in proxy force hands. The review concluded with a finding that required a significant expansion of collection assets focused on Iranian drone transfers to Lebanon, Syria, and Yemen. The assets were requested. The request was approved. It had not been requested before the incident. The diplomatic response moved through channels that were more public than usual. The United States issued a formal statement attributing the drone attack to Hezbollah and describing Iran as the direct supplier and enabler of the weapons used. The statement called for international condemnation and threatened unspecified consequences for further attacks on American military forces. Iran denied involvement. The Iranian Foreign Ministry described the attack as a resistance operation by Lebanese fighters in response to American aggression in the region. Resistance operation. That's the language. 3 allied governments, France, Germany, and the United Kingdom, issued a joint statement condemning the attack. The European Union issued a statement calling for restraint from all parties. The USS Thomas Hudner departed the eastern Mediterranean 28 days after the incident, returning to its home port of Mayport, Florida, for hull repairs and aviation facility restoration. The repair period was estimated at 60 to 90 days. The Ford strike group remained on station. USS Porter was moved from the western Mediterranean to fill the Hudner's position in the formation. The operating pattern did not change. The Presence mission continued. What happened at 14:33 p.m. in the eastern Mediterranean was a demonstration. Not a decisive military engagement, but a demonstration of capability and intent. 22 drones launched from 3 locations. 19 intercepted. 2 impacts on a U.S. Navy warship. Significant damage. Casualties. The mathematics of the engagement are not comfortable. If the salvo had been 40 drones instead of 22, the engagement sequence against the Hudner alone would have been saturated before the trailing contacts entered Phalanx range. The defensive margin, the buffer between what the ship can handle and what gets through, collapses as salvo size increases. At 60 drones, distributed across 2 or 3 ships simultaneously, the engagement would be simultaneous saturation of multiple defensive systems. At that scale, the question is not whether anything gets through. The question is how many things get through and what they hit. Iran has 120 airframes in Lebanon, according to the post-incident assessment. It used 22. The other 98 are still in inventory. The message delivered on the afternoon of the 14th was not sent without calculation. The Iranians and their Hezbollah proxies demonstrated that they could strike an American warship in the eastern Mediterranean with coordinated drone salvo attacks. They inflicted real damage. They withdrew. They did not expend their full inventory. They still have leverage. And the next time, if there is a next time, the altitude modifications will not be in 6% of the formation. They will be in all of them. Stay vigilant. Stay informed. I'll see you in the next one.